All right, welcome back to yet another episode of What's Your Story? So, our guest today is Miss Vinita Bali, the ex MD and CEO of Britannia Industries. Welcome so much, ma'am. Welcome to the podcast. We're so delighted to have you here.
Thank you, Kanikan.
There is so much to learn from. But before I get into, I have been aching to ask this question. Do CEOs take holidays?
Of
And if
course,
yes, do they have to put it at the company portal saying I'm going to be out of office for 2 days?
when I was CEO, we never had these company portals and so on. So you simply told, whoever your manager was or your chairman that I'm going on vacation and you went on vacation. But seriously, I think everybody needs to take holidays.
So you're not subscribing to the 90 hours and 70 hours.
I have always, honestly, Kanika, from the time I was a management trainee, till now, with my portfolio of different boards and so on and so forth, I have always gone to every concert I want to go to, seen every play I wanted to see, traveled to every place I wanted to travel to, and actually done exactly what I wanted to do and worked hard and traveled and delivered. So my motto is that, we've got to figure out how your work fits into your life, not how your life fits into your work.
How profoundly said. So I'm sensing a lot of work-life integration. That there
You
is
know,
this balance that goes off scale and comes back sometimes.
a lot of you sometimes we tend to actually confuse issues or make them more complex than they were. Work life integrate, work life balance. I mean, I don't know what is balance. For example, does balance mean equal, or does balance mean, this is also balance, this is not off balance, but what is balance? So I think it's really a question of harmonizing your life, which includes work. It includes relationships with your family, with your parents, with your spouse, relationships with your friends, relationship with the environment, when we travel. So, how do we manage multiple relationships? Because, I don't think any of us were born just to write code or discover a new molecule or, whatever.
So you're saying it's so much larger out there, and sometimes it could be a very small part in the entire universe. So, blend it all in.
And I think we have to do what. So, for me, for example, when I go and listen to a great music concert or see beautiful classical dance or see a wonderful play, I actually come back so energized, and I can actually do the work I'm supposed to be doing in half the time. We keep talking about productivity enhancement, and we say AI is going to enhance my productivity. You know what? My productivity is enhanced by going to see a great play or a music concert or a dance performance.
So how do you really rejuvenate yourself back
Yeah.
from surrounding? So powerful. But I'm also very curious that you've traveled so much. I want to really understand from you, what do you think are some of the cultural differences in terms of people, perspective, the place that it brought in, and how did you really navigate as an expat sometimes, and sometimes as a leader?
One of the advantages, actually, Kanika, of growing up in India is that you grow up with diversity. You grow up with people speaking different languages around you, eating different kinds of foods,
Yeah.
and so on. So I think we don't realize it, but we do grow up with a lot of variety, a lot of diversity, and so on. Now, when you go and work in a different country, and I've lived and worked in 6 countries on 5 continents, including South Africa. I was the first ever professional from India to go and work in South Africa. This was in 1993, and I'm very proud of that.
I'm sure.
So, what happens is, so there is a work culture, and there is obviously the culture of the country, the communities, the society there, and so on. What makes it easier as an executive working for a large multinational? And I worked for 2 very large multinationals in my overseas roles. One was the Coca-Cola company, and the other one was Cadbury Schweppes. There is a company culture at work, which in a way overrides any other culture. So, there is a certain way in which things are done, a certain process by which you do your plans, the performance against plans, how do you do meetings, etc., etc. The structures are very clear. The way work gets done is very clear. So, if you look at it in terms of people, processes, structures, metrics by which the business is evaluated, if they are more similar than different, that in a sense makes it easy for you as an executive to
Yes.
go across countries and, do your best work, as it were. What was fascinating for me was just learning about different cultures. It first tests your adaptive skills because, you go in there with a certain mental model that this is the way things should happen.
Sure.
And they don't. And then
Correct.
you say, okay, so I have to understand why they're happening differently because I am the person who's come into this culture.
Yes.
They are doing whatever they are doing. So I think and especially for somebody in marketing, it becomes even more critical. You know,
Absolutely.
I mean, if you are a finance executive, you know what? Cash flow is calculated the same way around the world.
Sure.
But if you're a marketing person and you're talking about customers and consumers and different kinds of consumers and what are their habits, and especially in food products, when you look at personal care products and food products, they are so close to individuals. It's a very intimate
Yes.
relationship that people have with food and what we put on our face or our hair or our bodies or whatever. So, in that, then you have to get into saying, okay, how do different cultures interpret the same thing? And that is where you've got to be very adaptive. You've got to learn to listen well. You've got to learn to put aside your judgment
Yeah.
and allow new information and new data to permeate you and then process it differently. So for me, living in different countries was a fascinating challenge because it was a personal challenge.
Interesting. You said that you were one of the very few people who were in South Africa as a single woman back in time. So, what was the initial reaction of the team having a woman leader now in a country where they may not have seen a leader in the past?
It wasn't so much about a woman leader. I think, again, understanding context is so critical to understanding. So there is an image we have of South Africa, which is today's image of South Africa. In 1993, when I went to work in South Africa, they hadn't even had their first election. So Mr. Mandela was released, I think, in February of 1990. It was definitely 1990. I could have got my month wrong. So at that time, the National Party and the ANC were having their dialogue on this great rainbow nation that South Africa was going to be, getting ready for the first ever democratic election to happen in South Africa, which happened in April of 1994. So it was a very different South Africa. It was a South Africa of hope. It was a South Africa of optimism. It was a South Africa which said, we're going to come together. Madiba, as Mr. Mandela was very affectionately called, was going to be there and we were going to take care of everything. The people from the ANC were getting a seat at the table to actually negotiate with the people in the National Party. So all this was happening. There was positive energy. There were all kinds of things. And here it's a very interesting anecdote I'll share with you. So when Cadbury first um, gave me this opportunity to go to South Africa. Actually, I was all set. I was on some program and I was all set to come back to India in 1993 and take over as CEO of the Indian company. But I was in Nigeria and that had gone exceedingly well. And they came and said, there's India always, but there's South Africa. And I said, you know what? I'm
Uh,
neither black nor white. How do I fit? And they say, that's exactly why you
right
fit.
with.
And we talk about companies today, you know, engaging with employees and taking care of employees. You know what Cadbury said to me at that time? I was in Lagos in Nigeria. They said, why don't you go and spend 10 days in South Africa?
Okay.
You travel around the country. Of course, you meet the people from Cadbury, South Africa. And then, you know, then it's your call. If you feel, we feel it'll be a great opportunity for you. But if you feel it's a great opportunity and you want to go to South Africa, you go there. Otherwise, there's always India. So I went off to South Africa. I fell in love with the place. It was just such a different experience
I'm
from
so.
what I had, from what I had gone through anywhere else. By that time, I had already lived in the UK for 2 years. I had lived in Nigeria for a year. I had, of course, lived and worked in India. And so I came back with absolutely no dilemma, and I was very clear that I wanted to go to South Africa. That was a very good cultural experience because, you know, what are we calling South Africa? That's why it was called the Rainbow Nation.
Hmm.
I mean, you know, at that time, I remember there were 42 million South Africans. 1.8 million of them were Afrikaners.
Hmm.
A total of 4 million were white. The rest were of Indian origin. And, you know,
Such a rainbow
so
country.
it was. And then trying to understand that culture, you know, why, I mean, are the reasons for buying a chocolate the same in South Africa as they are in the UK? Of course, the answer is no,
That's just different.
because the experience is very different. The environment is very different. The route to market is very different. So, yes, that is where culture plays a very big role. Understanding the customer, understanding the context, understanding the consumer, understanding the environment, understanding how decisions get made, how governments work.
And how you can work in possible tandem with the
Yeah,
government and make all
yeah.
of this happen. So if there was one thing you had to say, that's my leadership lesson that I have taken from my experience in South Africa, what would that be? Or like a leadership attribute or a leadership competency?
Well, the one thing I would say, not just from South Africa, but from the string of 6 different countries, as I said, on 5 different continents. The biggest thing I learned, and I keep saying this, is the importance of a leader to understand context. Because if you don't understand context,
Hmm.
you're never going to be able to connect. The
Yeah.
only way to connect with people, the only way to connect with ideas, the
Hmm.
only way to connect with concepts, the only way to connect with new imaginative ways of working and thinking and living is to understand context.
And being in the here and now, how do you imbibe what is right in front?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
powerful. I've often heard you say that marketplace success is has been your core mantra. Now I'm certain in leadership roles you've brought in a lot of changes that have happened, big, small, organization wide. If as a senior leader you had to say that what do you think is a quintessential element that drives maximum change or does not drive? Is it mindset? Is it people? Is it legacy processes which people are not willing to let go? Is it inability to change status quo or acknowledge the status quo sometimes, that is there a need for us to change? If you had to say there are these two or three things that either derail change or actually accentuate change, which one of these would you say are more important?
People, without a question.
People.
You know, people can derail
Uh,
and people can accentuate. And it's very important at the end of the day to have the right people, obviously with the right mindset, with the right attributes, with the right skills, experience, etc., etc. Because it is people who make the difference. Code doesn't write code. It
yeah.
is people who figured out how to put it into algorithms that will start writing code. But without people, there's nothing that can be made possible. So And, some of these lessons you learn the hard way. You say that, the fact that all of us have chosen to take up this job or whatever profession means that we're really going to come in and do our best every day. But sometimes the environment prevents people from doing the best. Sometimes the environment is a huge accelerator for people to do their best. A lot of work has been done with sports teams, for example. You know, it's the same set of individuals, it's the same, but the team manager or the
Coaches
coach,
sometimes, yeah.
etc., can make such a big difference because at the end of the day, every business is about human endeavor. I can't think of any business which at its core doesn't have, you know, a human enterprise, endeavor, hard work, ideas, um, resiliency, tenacity, whatever word you want to use, alignment associated with it.
So true. And as they say, it's EI in the age of AI. Which is such a core. I'm very curious to know. There's a lot of research being done out there, and maybe this is the last question I want to speak in this regard, which is to say, they say organizations are designed for men. Would you say that statement is correct or incorrect?
Let's put it this way, that it is a fact. It is a fact that our entire world is very skewed. Most decisions are made by men, whether these are political decisions, whether these are business decisions, because they happen to be in those roles. Year after year, whether it is the World Economic Forum or the UN Foundation, we see reports and we say that at the current rate at which the world is operating, is going to take another 137 years before we can say that men and women have equal opportunities. So it is a very skewed world that we're living in, and it can get further skewed depending on the country,
Yes.
depending on the family, depending on
Social fabric.
urban or rural. There are so many other stratifications that you can put into this.
True.
So uh, because so many decisions are made by men, what is it that we are missing in the dialogue? We are missing a diverse point of view.
Hmm.
So diversity is not just about gender.
It's about
Diversity is
feeling.
also about experience.
Yeah.
Diversity is also about perspective. What an African can see in Africa, as an Indian, I probably can't see that. What I, as an Indian, can see in a village in my country, somebody coming from the outside may not be able to see that. So I think we have to take diversity with a capital D in its
Right.
full splendor and then say, do we have all the voices on the table?
So what I'm hearing you say, the rainbow of voices. I'm sensing a lot of time it's the organizational leadership which also has to think about from an ESG perspective, from a compliance perspective, and not because it's told to you is why you do it out of your own conscience. And I know of for a fact that in your time when you were in Britannia, you had cut down all trans fat in all your biscuits. When it's not even a regulation, you were not even required to do it. You did it out of your own conscience and you made that conscious choice. Now my question to you is, how easy was it to sell that idea to the board? Was there a price? You may have eroded your margins per se. How did you come about before time? It was a before time idea that you took that decision.
It wasn't just that. And I want to step back and say that, actually, if business does what is right for people,
Hmm.
we talked about 3 P's: people, profit, planet. I mean, we've got all of these things: conscious capitalism, all kinds of books that have been written and so on. But at the end of the day, I think what we're really saying is, what is the responsibility of leadership? The responsibility of leadership is not just, the famous saying of Milton Friedman, the business of business is business. Yes, it is business, but it is also, there are many stakeholders, starting with the environment, starting with people, starting with communities, starting with, And all of that is the responsibility that business has to undertake. So it started with removing trans fats, but it went on to fortifying some of the key brands that Britannia has with micronutrients. And what was the insight that got us there? The insight that got us there was a report which comes out every year. It's called the World Nutrition Report, which said that children under the age of 5 in India suffer from multiple micronutrient deficiencies. So 42% of children under the age of 5 continue to be either wasted or stunted or low in weight. And micronutrient fortification is something that has happened since the 20s and the 30s. It's a very simple thing. We have universal salt iodization, which
Yes.
happened in the 1980s. We don't talk very much about goiter and what lack of iodine does because it has just made sure that
It's
as
become.
you're consuming oil,
Yeah.
yes, as you're consuming salt, you're getting that. So we did micronutrient fortification as well before actually India had any standards for
Yes.
proprietary foods to be fortified. So I went to the board and we had done our work. We had done very good homework. We partnered with the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, with the community health department to develop these fortified biscuits that we tested over a period of time, longitudinally, etc., etc. And then we said, well, this is what we're going to do, and this is the rationale. And every board is going to be supportive of management that goes with such a compelling idea, which has a strong rationale. It has
For the
empirical evidence. It has empirical evidence and it has a very compelling proposition. You know, we are still talking about 800 million people in this country getting free rice and wheat, even today.
today. Yeah. Through the
So,
rations. And actually, that gets me to ask you this next one that, there are a lot of people who are looking to be, say, being on the boards, really wanting to get that position. You've now been both in C suite and also as a board leader, board member. What do you think is the difference in the key roles or the key expectation of focus between these two roles? Is it the expectations out of you? Is it the mindset horizon change that you need to bring in? Is it more about connecting the dots? What do you think is the primal difference between a C suite executive and a board member?
oh, it's at the heart of governance. You know, that question is at the heart of governance. You know, the two are necessary and they don't overlap. You know, so when you say what is the role of a board, let's say a listed company or even an unlisted company, effective boards. So, to my mind, again, I like to simplify things because otherwise we tend to get lost in theory. A board does three or four things. It is the responsibility of the board to ensure that the business has the right CEO and the right leadership. So, CEO selection, making sure the CEO has the right leadership under her or him is task number one of the board. The second thing is then to ensure that with the right people in place and the right leadership in place, the business has the best competitive strategy that it can create for its own business. And therefore, a responsible allocation of capital when it comes to its position in the marketplace. The third then is to ensure that there is a governance cadence that guides the way, work gets done. What is the org structure? What is the remuneration system at a high level, at policy level? How are employees rewarded, compensated, long term, short term, options, no options, etc., etc. That's all still guiding. So the role of the board is very much to work with management or to work alongside management. It's not working with management, to work alongside management to steer and guide and ensure that the best decision is being taken for the company, which is responsible in terms of allocation of capital and therefore return on capital. It is best in terms of over a period of time, really creating businesses that have value, businesses that are right for consumers, businesses that are right for the environment. ESG, CSR, etc., etc. If business was doing everything that business should be doing, it is my hypothesis, and I've argued we should not have had to do over and above, on top of it, other things that we are now
Yes.
paying attention to because of CSR and ESG. That should be part of.
This should
Uh,
have always been. It shouldn't have
that
been
should be,
mandated
yeah.
in
Why should, why should our rivers be polluted with water from chemical factories? How do rivers get polluted? They don't pollute
on,
themselves.
on their own.
We do something to go and pollute the rivers. Then we say we'll spend CSR money to clean the rivers we have polluted. That doesn't make any sense either.
Had it
So,
been well.
so I think the board is responsible for ensuring that there is the right CEO and the right leadership in place. There is the right and responsible strategy for the business. There is a governance cadence that enables them to direct and measure performance. And the fourth, that there is a culture and environment that works for people, that is responsible to its stakeholders, not just its shareholders. Now, that is the role of the board. The role of the executive is to make all of this happen.
Sure. So that you feel is like the
Yeah.
fundamental.
And therefore, in order to be an effective board member, I believe it is always helpful if you have run a business. And trust me, when you are so used to doing and you join your first board
Hmm.
and those executives are presenting and you're sitting there and saying, oh, I could give them answers to these. And then you hold yourself back and say, that is not the role
That's so.
that
Uh,
you are playing here or expected to play or should be playing.
so there's a difference in perspective, the large sightedness.
And therefore smart boards are boards that actually get executives who have worked in different areas, in different industries, different domains, different countries, to be able to get that big diversity of experience to benefit how they think about their business.
So true. I can totally relate to that. Um, because we're talking about so many businesses and you've been on the boards for many, you've been working in as an executive. When you look at with all that experience behind you, if you had to probably choose to get into business today or choose to invest in some business today, what would that really be? With years of wisdom behind you, next would you want to bet your money on or, your professional services on?
Education,
Okay.
primary education.
Okay. Anything in particular why you think, this is the big
Because I think the foundation of everything is laid in school. How interesting we make geography, how interesting we make math, how interesting we make English literature determines how many students will actually end up pursuing that. And I don't think secondary and tertiary education can make up for what is
what is
lost
lacking.
in primary education. And it is, what should I say? It's the starting force of everything.
So true.
Even if I want to become a painter, there is something I need to know about canvas and painting and this and that. And it's not just this, unshaken creativity, which of course is always there. But I think that element of, um, uh, it's not about knowing. I think education is what creates the perennial curiosity in you to be a student forever.
So true.
That's what I call education.
And
And
that
I think it was Mark Twain or Oscar Wilde who said, I've never let schooling interfere with my education. And I can go through school and be a 95 percenter, but what is it that I actually know? What is it that I can actually do? How much do I comprehend? How curious am I? How interested am I in different things? How engaged do I want to be with the world I'm in and with life itself? I think that's what education does to you.
So true. And I'm sensing it's called foundation for the same reason. You
Yes,
can't undo a foundation.
exactly. And if
20
the
years later.
foundation is
Yeah.
strong, you can put anything on it.
So true. Because we're talking about foundations right now, I'm really curious to know who is Vinita's biggest cheerleader outside in your realm of people who are around you, who you feel has been your biggest cheerleader for whatever you did.
I have no idea. I have no idea, but I have to say that I've been very fortunate that, wherever I have worked, people I've worked with, up, down, peer group, etc. I've always had, excellent colleagues. And I call all of them colleagues, managers I worked for, my own direct reports, management trainees, etc. And I think I've really enjoyed. And what I personally feel very good about is that I can literally pick up the phone and speak to people in, I don't know, 35, 40 countries, which I
Powerful.
have visited or where I've had an opportunity to work. And, I know those people, we're still in touch. And I think that's what makes life really interesting. So
You have
I'm not
cheerleaders across
sure.
35 countries, I'm sensing then in
No,
that.
no, I'm not. I don't know what you mean by a cheerleader, but I think people who've been very supportive,
Yeah.
people who've encouraged me, people who've actually given me the courage to take more risks than I would have taken on my own, people who've kind of egged me on. I think those are the people I'm eternally grateful for.
Interesting. If you had to, when you look around in the new genre of new leaders, is there someone's leadership perspective, or maybe the business that they do that you've been really intrigued with, and you're like, now this is a very interesting person. Is this, would you like to name anyone in the leadership scenario who's around us right now? Somebody you think is interesting?
I think there are people who've sort of thought differently and broken the mold in many ways. And I'm thinking more about companies. And of course, it's been the leaders in those companies. You take a company like Patagonia, for example. They
Wow.
talk about they talk
So,
about the environment.
yeah.
I have great admiration for a company that actually advertises and says, you don't have to buy a new Patagonia jacket. Bring
Hmm.
your old one and
Hmm.
we'll see if we can repair it. And if we can't, then you can buy a new one. Now, I really think if you
Profound.
are responsible, if you feel responsible for the environment, you would do everything possible
Hmm.
to actually take care of the environment. Uh,
So it's interesting, right? Sometimes when you go to a lot of these organizations, there is these big value charts that are put up in every wall when you're walking through the corridor. And a lot of time they may be lived values or said values, but in this particular case, I'm sensing this is almost like a lived value
yeah,
that care for the environment. And isn't that more beautiful?
yeah. Oh, another brand I remember when it was launched, it was, I think, sometime early 2000, Tom's Shoes. They launched, and I think they still continue to do that, which says, for every Tom's shoe you buy,
Hmm.
somebody in Africa will get a pair of shoes.
How profound is
Now,
that?
what I'm saying is when you embed a social cause into your business model, that's when magic happens. You then don't say that, my business is to sell whatever I'm selling. And by the way, my CSR money is spent in running these primary schools. Because, if I'm not in the
Yes,
business of
CSR
running
is
schools, what do I know about running schools? Or you take hospitals that say, okay, 30% of patients we will treat, and the same doctors, who treat those people who pay a lot of money are going to treat the 30% who come in who don't have money to pay, but they will get the same quality of treatment. I think that's when we begin to make a big difference.
that's the
So,
Print, and that's the real DNA of an organization, right?
Exactly. And that is where you say that cost or that initiative or that whatever you might want to call it is included in my business model. It's not standing apart from my business model, which is why I liked what we did, and I think a lot of food companies have since followed,
Yeah.
is that if we can if we can fortify with vitamins and minerals which are deficient in India, products that people are consuming. Salt is a great example. Fortified edible oil is another great example.
Yeah.
There is talk of fortified rice being distributed through the public distribution system. These are very small things, but they have big impact.
It's the TNT. These are tiny little spots, but I think when they explode, they can be so much bigger than that. Because we are talking about actions, I have last few questions, and one of them I've always been curious, and I want to ask you is there something called like being lucky, or do you think people make their own luck?
I don't know. It's again one of those things, or how lucky he or she is. And as somebody said, luck favors those who work hard. So, but I think sometimes, even if you've worked hard and so on and so forth, sometimes just being in the place or being in the moment
Hmm,
where your skill or your something is required is helpful. But equally, you've got to take the opportunity. I mean,
absolutely.
I look at my own case, when this thing was that I was going to Nigeria. Now, if
Yeah.
I had said no to Nigeria, I'm not sure
How
how
the
different my trajectory would be. But certainly in my mind, Nigeria led to South Africa, which led to Atlanta, which led to Chile, which led to whatever, whatever. Uh,
glad to
so,
hear.
so it is about being there, but it is also about choices we make. I certainly believe that there is, some great energy that is guiding, what we do. But I also feel that I have a big part to play in what happens to me and my energy, because I am given the choice of saying yes, no, maybe, or whatever.
So true. So I'm hearing it's very similar to the discussion we were having before the podcast started, where we were talking about, me and Vinita were talking about that how you can manifest a very large part of your life, but the little details or your journey en route to that manifestation sometimes is changed, altered by the people we meet, the chance meetings, the connecting of the dot, and how sometimes lives can become very divergent.
Yeah, this whole idea of fortification, it
Yes.
just happened over a dinner, because this large Swiss foundation called the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition was opening an office here. I was invited as the managing director of Britannia by uh, the Dr. Reddy's Foundation, who were running kitchens that make midday meals that go to children in schools. And we just happened to be talking. And then we said, well, biscuit is a great carrier of micronutrients. So why don't we do something? It was that dinner meeting
Huh.
which led to the big initiatives that we subsequently did when I was in Britannia, and which continues to this day, and
Mm.
which has been extended to other food companies around
Right.
the world.
So, how one tiny action in one organization has led to a cascade effect to multiple
Mhm.
others. In fact, I was going to ask you, big board decisions, do they come in the boardroom or do they come while you are on a run and you're thinking about it and it strikes you then? So, where does it really happen?
No, some come, some are in the boardroom, some are in the shower, some are some are on a plane when you're doing long flights.
Yes.
Uh, so
30, as they say, it's the
and I
area
think,
too, right? Which is farther
yeah,
away.
yeah.
Now
And I
maybe.
think different people think differently. There are people who take something, and whilst they're not thinking about it all the time, somewhere in the recesses of your mind, it's marinating, and
Hmm.
you see some of this and you see some of that. And then you say, okay, how can it all come together? Because, a lot of what we call innovation is
Yeah.
also the ability to connect disparate dots.
Yes.
You know, everything is not linear. In
Yeah.
fact, the more interesting innovation is what is lateral.
Yeah.
And where does lateral thinking come from? Or if you follow Daniel Kahneman, thinking fast, thinking
It's
slow.
like, yeah.
So sometimes an idea emerges. Sometimes you have to really
Well,
grind it till you
get
chisel it till you can see it. So it is a combination. But
so
you
as
have to allow your mind. You have to allow your mind to take in new information. I think that's the other most important thing. If you have closed your mind, and if you're not allowing different thoughts or disparate thoughts or opposing thoughts to infiltrate your mind, how are you going to change it?
So true. So, as Daniel Kahneman talks about in his book, which is Thinking Fast and Slow, he talks about there are two systems, system one and system two thinking. If I had to ask you to give away any last inputs before we close the session today on how the youngsters out there, how they can really work on the system one and system two, more importantly, what do you think can be like a great guiding philosophy for someone who could be just starting out, could be a young executive out there or a young person who's trying to make you know get in the right inputs from the world. So if you had to give away your final thoughts on how people should channel their minds together, what would that be?
Again, it's contextual.
Hmm.
um, there are some everyday tasks that don't require slow thinking.
So
You
just
just do it, you get them out of the way. We call them habits. I know I
yeah.
have to wake up every morning, I have to brush my teeth, I have to have a shower. Am I going to sit and think about it? I don't.
Hmm.
I hope most people don't, because those have become habits. But
Yes.
there are other things, where they say you can't just jump to a conclusion, no matter how smart you are. There are certain decisions that impact not just you or your organization, but they impact communities, they impact societies, they impact the environment, they impact uh, animals and birds. And how are you going to take those decisions? Now those are not, those have to be thought through. Those have to be what should I say, uh, decisions where different input is called for, because it's not a straightforward linear decision.
Yeah.
um, and I think just having the capacity to say, what are the areas on which we spend time, and
Hmm.
what are the areas on which we can race through,
Yeah.
is itself, a big learning.
It's a great learning to possibly be
Is
begin with.
itself a big learning.
Absolutely. Now, behind you is this big bookshelf, which has plethora of books which you've collected over the years. If you had to give away one to our audience that you think is something that most people should read, which one would that be?
Oh my gosh. Now that's a very, very, very difficult question, because it contains some of my, very, very favorite books. But since we are talking business and we were talking about marketing, there is a book that Professor Theodore Levitt wrote many years ago when he was teaching at Harvard Business School. It's called The Marketing Imagination.
Okay.
I still find that to be an excellent book for, just uh, jogging your mind and so on. And there's another very wonderful book. So let me give you two. So that anybody can read. Even the second one, anybody can read, is a book that was given to me. It's a book that is authored by Sir Adrian Cadbury. And I think it's got a blue cover. It's called Chairmanship and the Art of Corporate Governance. He wrote that.
In the art of corporate
Yeah,
governance.
he wrote that, I think, sometime in the 90s, when he was, there was the famous Cadbury Commission that was called in to look at corporate governance after uh, there were issues at, Barclays Bank and some of the other banks, if I remember correctly, in the UK. And it was the Cadbury Commission. And to this date, I actually believe, if I'm ever in doubt,
Hmm.
I go to Sir Adrian Cadbury's book and I
Um,
look up a chapter. It is so clear. It is so, uh, the clarity of this book
Pragmatic.
is amazing.
Yeah, maybe the pragmatism of the book or the practicality.
It's the clarity with
Ah,
to do with governance.
interesting. So no governance dilemma per se, because I'm sure this book is already reckoned that way.
Ready reckoner in the sense that it gives you an answer, but it
Yeah.
tells you how to go about getting to the answer.
Ah,
It's a fantastic book. I would recommend it to
takes you through the
anybody
journey of
who
exploration.
wants to, uh, you know, who's interested in governance. Actually,
Very interesting. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being with us today. Some very interesting conversations that we have taken through, and the one that's standing with me is the power of choices. The choice as an Indian, the choice to be in your comfort zone of being in India versus choosing to go to Africa. And I'm also taking back from you, how do you create rainbow teams where very vivid experiences, vivid thought processes kind of come together to bring all the voices on the table, because that's when you're making a very, very informed kind decision. And I think the last one is, profit, but also the planet. And how, if you're mindful of the planet, the profits, are important. Businesses are here for the purpose of business, but how even planets are essentially so important. So thank you for being such a stalwart industry leader in this sense. Thank you for your time with us today. Thank you so much for being with us.
thank you for giving me this opportunity.